There is a story told in silence, in the spaces between words we dare not speak. It lives in the hearts of those who smile when they are breaking, who give when they have nothing left, who apologize for existing. This is not a story of evil. This is a story of goodness, twisted, weaponized, turned against the very soul it was meant to protect. Imagine, if you will, a woman standing at the edge of her own life. Her name is irrelevant. She could be your mother, your sister, your friend. She could be you. For 37 years, she has been perfect. Not perfect in the sense of flawless, but perfect in the way saints are supposed to be perfect. Selfless, endlessly giving, always available, never angry, never too much, never taking up too much space. She wakes at dawn to prepare breakfast for a family that barely acknowledges her. She works a job where she is underpaid, but never complains, because complaining would be selfish. She answers every phone call, responds to every text, says yes to every request, even when her body screams for rest. At night, alone in the darkness, she lies awake with a pain she cannot name, a pain that has no visible wound, no diagnosable disease. It is the pain of disappearing while still breathing. And then one morning, something breaks. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small crack in the facade. She is asked to stay late at work again, to cover for someone else again, and for the first time in her life, she feels it, a surge of pure, undiluted rage, not at the request itself, but at the realization of what she has become. A ghost, a convenience, a doormat dressed in the costume of virtue. This is where our journey begins. Not with a hero's triumph, but with a quiet catastrophe, the moment when being good reveals itself as a form of slow suicide. What does it mean to be good? We are taught this from infancy, aren't we? Be nice. Share your toys. Don't be selfish. Think of others first. These are the commandments of civilized society, the moral architecture upon which communities are built, and they are not wrong. Kindness is essential. Empathy is what makes us human. But somewhere between childhood and adulthood, something goes terribly wrong for some of us. The lesson of kindness becomes a prison. The virtue of selflessness becomes a weapon of self-destruction. Tonight, I want to take you on a journey into one of the most misunderstood territories of the human psyche, the shadow of kindness, the dark side of virtue, the place where being good transforms into a pathology so insidious that its victims defend it even as it destroys them. This is not a story for those who seek easy answers. This is not a self-help seminar where I will give you 5 simple steps to better boundaries. No, this is an excavation, an archaeology of the soul. We are going to descend into the depths where goodness curdles into something else, something that masquerades as morality, but is actually a sophisticated form of self-annihilation. We will walk through the mansions of psychology where Carl Jung discovered the shadow, that part of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, that grows more monstrous the more we deny it. We will visit the laboratories of neuroscience, where researchers are discovering how chronic self-sacrifice literally rewires the brain, creating neural pathways of martyrdom. We will sit with philosophers who understood that virtue without self-awareness becomes vice, and we will meet the real people, millions of them, who suffer from what I call the kindness wound, a psychological injury so normalized that we have mistaken it for health. But more than this, we will tell a story, because facts alone do not transform, data does not heal. It is story, archetypal, mythic, deeply personal, that penetrates the defenses of the rational mind and speaks directly to the soul. So I ask you now, have you ever felt the weight of your own goodness crushing you? Have you ever smiled through gritted teeth, agreed when you wanted to scream no, apologized for someone else's cruelty? Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered where you went? Not the body, but the self, the person you were before you learned to sacrifice your existence for the approval of others? If so, you are not alone. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are suffering from one of the most misdiagnosed conditions of modern life, the shadow of kindness. And tonight, we begin the work of bringing it into the light. The ancient Greeks had a word for this, hubris, but not the hubris we typically understand, the arrogance of pride. No, there is another kind of hubris, rarely discussed. The hubris of goodness, the belief that one can transcend human limitation through perfect selflessness, the grandiose fantasy that if we just give enough, sacrifice enough, disappear enough, we will finally be worthy of love. It is a tragic delusion, and it is killing people. As we embark on this exploration, I need you to understand something fundamental. This is not an attack on kindness. This is not a manifesto for selfishness. This is an invitation to examine the difference between authentic compassion and pathological self-abandonment. There is a universe of difference between choosing to give from a place of wholeness and compulsively giving from a place of terror of rejection, of conflict, of being seen as anything less than perfect. One is love. The other is fear wearing love's mask. Over the next 2 hours, we will trace the origins of this shadow, understand its psychological mechanisms, witness its devastating effects, and most importantly, discover the path toward what I call integrated goodness, a form of kindness that does not require self-destruction, a compassion that includes the self rather than excludes it. This journey will take us from ancient philosophy to cutting-edge neuroscience, from the consulting rooms of psychoanalysts to the lived experience of those who have walked this path and survived. We will explore why some people develop this wound and others don't, how culture and trauma conspire to create it, and why healing it requires not less goodness, but a different kind of goodness, one rooted in wholeness rather than in wound. We begin, as all true journeys must, at the beginning. Not the beginning of your life, but the beginning of the idea itself, the moment in human history when goodness became complicated, when virtue became something more than simple moral action and transformed into a psychological battlefield. Are you ready? Then let us descend. Act 1. The origins, the birth of the false saint. To understand how kindness becomes self-harm, we must first understand how the human mind learns what it means to be good, and for that we must travel back, not just to childhood, but to the very origins of moral consciousness itself. Picture a child, perhaps 3 years old, in the late afternoon light of an ordinary home. She has just taken a toy from her younger brother. The brother cries. The parents rush in, and the child sees something in their faces, not just disapproval, but something deeper, something that triggers a primal terror, disappointment, withdrawal of love. And in that moment, a calculation is made, so fast it bypasses conscious thought. My survival depends on being good. If I am not good, I will be abandoned. And abandonment is death. This is not melodrama. For a human child, rejection by caregivers is a legitimate survival threat. We are born premature compared to other mammals, helpless for years. Evolution has hardwired into us an exquisite sensitivity to signs of social rejection, because for our ancestors, being cast out from the tribe meant death. The child who learns to please, to attune to others' needs, to suppress their own desires in service of group harmony, that child survives. But at what cost? The psychologist Alice Miller, in her groundbreaking work on childhood trauma, described something she called the drama of the gifted child, the pattern by which highly sensitive, emotionally intelligent children learn to abandon their authentic selves in order to become what their parents need them to be. These are often not children of obvious abuse, no. These are children of parents who are themselves wounded, depressed, narcissistic, or emotionally unavailable. Parents who unconsciously use their children as sources of narcissistic supply, emotional regulation, or self-esteem. The child learns with devastating accuracy to read the emotional atmosphere. They become miniature therapists, performing emotional labor that should never be asked of a child, and they are rewarded for this. What a good child, people say. So mature for their age, so helpful, so considerate. The child blooms under this praise. It feels like love, it feels like safety, but it is a trap. Because what the child has actually learned is not how to be good, but how to disappear. They have learned that their worth is conditional, dependent on their usefulness, their agreeability, their ability to manage others' emotions, their true self, with its needs, its anger, its messiness, its authentic desires, is exiled into what Carl Jung called the shadow. Jung, that great cartographer of the psyche, understood something that most of his contemporaries missed. The shadow is not just our dark impulses, our aggression, our sexuality. The shadow is everything we had to disown in order to be accepted. For many people, especially those raised in families or cultures that prized selflessness above all, the shadow contains not darkness but light, the light of healthy self-interest, of appropriate anger, of the word no. Listen to this carefully. If you were taught that your needs are selfish, then your needs live in your shadow. If you were taught that anger is unacceptable, then your anger lives in your shadow. If you were taught that saying no makes you a bad person, then your boundaries live in your shadow. And everything in the shadow grows monstrous in the darkness. It doesn't disappear. It becomes distorted, poisonous, unintegrated. This is the origin of the kindness wound, not in evil, but in a child's desperate attempt to survive by being good. And it is reinforced by every layer of society. Consider the religious traditions that many of us inherited. I am not here to condemn religion. Many spiritual traditions contain profound wisdom about compassion and service, but we must be honest about how these teachings have been weaponized, distorted, turned into instruments of psychological control. Turn the other cheek. Love your enemies. The meek shall inherit the earth. It is better to give than to receive. These teachings, intended as paths to enlightenment, to the transcendence of ego, are given to children who do not yet have an ego to transcend. You cannot transcend what you have never developed. You cannot surrender a self you never possessed. The child who is taught to always forgive, to never protest mistreatment, to see suffering as noble, that child is not learning spiritual wisdom. They are learning to be a victim. They are being groomed for exploitation, and it is being called virtue. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche saw this with brutal clarity. In his genealogy of morals, he distinguished between what he called master morality and slave morality. Master morality values strength, vitality, self-affirmation. Slave morality, born from the resentment of the powerless, reframes weakness as virtue. Meekness becomes goodness, self-denial becomes saintliness, suffering becomes redemption. Nietzsche was not advocating for cruelty. He was diagnosing a psychological poison, the way that oppressed people, unable to fight back against their oppressors, internalize their oppression and call it morality. And he saw with disturbing prescience how this slave morality would spread like a virus, creating generations of people who are allergic to their own power, who feel guilty for wanting, for taking up space, for existing with needs and desires. This is especially true for women, for minorities, for anyone socialized into subordinate roles. The cultural message is clear. Your value lies in your service to others. Your worth is measured by your selflessness. To assert yourself is to be selfish, aggressive, unfeminine, ungrateful. The good woman sacrifices. The good child obeys. The good employee never complains. the good citizen doesn't make trouble. And so the pattern crystallizes. By adolescence, by early adulthood, the kindness wound is fully formed. It is no longer just a survival strategy. It has become identity itself. I am a kind person. I am a giving person. I am a good person. The false self has completely eclipsed the true self, and the person no longer even knows they are missing. They move through life with a smile painted on their face and a scream locked in their throat. They give and give and give and wonder why they feel empty. They accommodate and adjust and apologize and wonder why they feel like they're disappearing. They never say no, never set boundaries, never disappoint anyone, and wonder why they feel like they're dying. But here is the cruelest trick. They cannot see it, because to see it would be to admit they have been wrong about who they are. It would be to confront the terrifying possibility that their entire identity is built on a lie. And so the mind employs every defense mechanism in its arsenal to maintain the illusion. Rationalization: I'm just naturally giving. I enjoy helping people. Denial: I'm fine. I don't need anything. I'm happy making others happy. Projection: other people are so selfish. Don't they care about anyone but themselves? Spiritual bypass: ego is the problem. I'm working on transcending my ego. Needing things is attachment. The psychologist Donald Winnicott had a term for this: the false self. The false self is the persona we create to be acceptable, to be loved, to survive in an environment that couldn't tolerate our authentic being. It is a brilliant adaptation, a testimony to human resilience. The child who creates a false self is not weak. They are ingenious, resourceful, doing whatever it takes to survive. But the false self cannot sustain adult life. It is a survival mechanism designed for childhood, and when we drag it into adulthood, it becomes a prison. Because the false self can never actually receive love. No matter how much approval it gets, no matter how much it gives, it remains fundamentally empty. Because the love is not for the real self, it is for the performance. And somewhere deep inside, the person knows this. They know they are loved for what they do, not for who they are. This creates a devastating psychological double bind. The more you give, the more you must give to maintain the illusion of worth. The more you sacrifice, the more you must sacrifice to justify the previous sacrifices. I've given so much already, the mind reasons. I can't stop now, or it will all have been for nothing. This is the sunk cost fallacy applied to the self, throwing good life after bad, trying to redeem a fundamentally flawed strategy by doubling down on it. And all of this intricate psychological architecture is invisible to the person experiencing it. Because it has the perfect camouflage, it looks like goodness. It feels like virtue. It is praised by society, rewarded by relationships, especially dysfunctional ones, and reinforced by cultural narratives about selflessness and sacrifice. The trap is complete. But here in the origins, we can see it for what it is. Not evil, not weakness, but a tragedy. The tragedy of a child who learned to survive by disappearing. The tragedy of a human being who confused love with utility. The tragedy of goodness so desperate for approval that it devoured the very person it was supposed to protect. This is where the shadow of kindness is born, in the gap between the true self and the false self, in the space where authentic desire is suffocated by compulsive giving, in the moment when a child decides that their existence is less important than their function. And now, having seen its origins, we must witness its consequences. Aced, too, the conflict, when goodness becomes poison. The descent into the shadow of kindness is not sudden. It is a slow erosion, like water wearing away stone. Years pass, decades. The person who has built their identity on being good, being kind, being selfless, moves through life collecting wounds they cannot acknowledge, accumulating resentments they cannot express, drowning in needs they cannot admit. And then the symptoms begin. Let me introduce you to Maria. Maria is 42 years old, a nurse, a mother of 3, beloved by her community. If you asked anyone who knows her to describe her, they would use words like generous, caring, always there for you. Maria volunteers at her children's school, organizes meals for sick neighbors, works double shifts to cover for colleagues. Her house is always open. Her phone is always on. She is the person everyone calls in a crisis. Maria is also dying inside. She doesn't call it that, of course. She calls it stress. She calls it just feeling tired. She calls it probably just need to eat better and exercise more. But the truth she cannot speak even to herself, is that Maria has disappeared. The person who was Maria, the girl who once loved to paint, who had dreams of traveling, who felt things deeply and wanted things fiercely, that person was sacrificed long ago on the altar of being good. What remains is a function, a role, a set of behaviors designed to make others comfortable and keep the peace. And the cost of maintaining this false self is extracted from her body. This is where the psychological becomes physiological. This is where the mind's denial confronts the body's brutal honesty. The field of psychoneuroimmunology has revealed something astonishing. Chronic self-suppression, the constant denial of authentic needs and emotions, creates measurable changes in the body. Stress hormones like cortisol remain chronically elevated. The immune system becomes dysregulated. Inflammation increases. The body, forced to carry the burden of unexpressed emotions, begins to break down. Maria has chronic migraines, unexplained pain in her neck and shoulders that no amount of physical therapy can resolve. Irritable bowel syndrome, insomnia. She visits doctor after doctor, receives diagnosis after diagnosis, but nothing helps. Because the illness is not in her body, it is in her soul. Her body is simply telling the truth that her mind refuses to hear. You are betraying yourself. You are living a lie. You are dying by degrees. The therapist Gabor Maté, who has spent decades working with chronically ill patients, observed a striking pattern. Many people with serious illnesses, cancer, autoimmune diseases, chronic pain, share a personality type. They are exceptionally nice, agreeable, conflict avoidant, self-sacrificing. They are the good patients, the ones who apologize for taking up the doctor's time, who minimize their symptoms, who put everyone else's needs first. Maté doesn't claim that being nice causes disease. That would be reductive. But he argues something more subtle, that chronic self-repression, the habitual denial of one's authentic emotional reality, creates the conditions in which disease can flourish. When we systematically suppress our anger, our grief, our disappointment, our desires, those emotions don't disappear. They go into the body. They become the body. And the body keeps the score. But the physical symptoms are only the beginning. The true devastation of the kindness wound plays out in relationships. Think about this. If your entire identity is built on being needed, what kind of people will you attract? What kind of relationships will you build? You will attract takers, narcissists, energy vampires, people who have learned to spot givers from a mile away and exploit them without shame. Not because they are evil, though some may be, but because the dynamic you have created invites it. You have advertised yourself as someone with no boundaries, no limits, no needs of your own. You have positioned yourself as an inexhaustible resource, and people, especially wounded people, will use you until you are empty. Maria's marriage is a case study in this dynamic. Her husband, Michael, is not a monster. He is not abusive in any obvious way. He doesn't hit her, doesn't cheat, doesn't drink. But he is utterly emotionally disconnected. He spends his evenings on his phone, his weekends playing golf, his life in a bubble of his own comfort. He has no idea that Maria is suffering, because Maria never tells him. She cooks his favorite meals, does his laundry, manages his social calendar, supports his career, and never ever asks for anything in return. Why? Because asking would be selfish, asking would be needy, asking would risk conflict, rejection, the withdrawal of love. And so she doesn't ask. She suffers in silence, and her suffering becomes invisible, and her invisibility becomes the foundation of the relationship. And here is the terrible irony. The more she gives, the less he values her, not because he is cruel, but because human psychology works on principles of scarcity and value. We treasure what costs us something. We protect what is rare. But Maria has made herself abundant, available, cost-free. She has taught Michael that her needs don't matter, that her emotions are not serious, that she will always be there no matter how he treats her. She has taught him, in effect, not to see her. And then she resents him for being blind to what she has made invisible. This is the central conflict of the kindness wound. The very behaviors that feel like love are actually preventing love. The self-sacrifice that seems like virtue is actually enabling dysfunction. The goodness that appears noble is actually a sophisticated form of self-harm, and the person caught in this pattern cannot see it, because to see it would require admitting something unbearable, that they are complicit in their own suffering, that they are not actually victims of other people's selfishness, but architects of their own invisibility, that their goodness is not goodness at all, but fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of anger, fear of being ordinary, flawed, imperfect, fear of taking up space, fear of wanting, fear of the shadow. Carl Jung understood that what we resist persists. The more we push something into the shadow, the more power it gains over us. Maria has pushed her needs, her anger, her desire for recognition into the shadow for so long that these parts of her have become monstrous. They leak out in passive-aggressive comments, in martyrdom, in chronic resentment that she won't acknowledge, but that poisons every interaction. She sighs heavily while doing dishes, making sure everyone hears how hard she works. She says, "I'm fine," in a tone that clearly means, "I'm not fine, but I need you to beg me to tell you what's wrong." She gives birthday gifts and then tallies in her mind whether she received equivalent gifts in return. She helps friends and then feels hurt when they don't reciprocate, but never directly asks for what she needs. She is drowning in unspoken resentment, and it is curdling into bitterness. This is the shadow taking its revenge. This is what happens when goodness becomes pathological. The philosopher Martin Buber distinguished between what he called I-thou and I-it relationships. In an I-thou relationship, both people are subjects, whole beings encountering each other in authentic presence. In an I-it relationship, one or both people become objects, means to an end rather than ends in themselves. The person trapped in the kindness wound creates only I-it relationships, even though they desperately want I-thou. They objectify themselves, turning themselves into instruments of others' happiness. And they unconsciously objectify others, viewing them as potential sources of validation, approval, proof of worth. Both people become objects in a transaction disguised as relationship, and no one is actually seen, actually met, actually loved. This is the loneliness at the core of the kindness wound, the loneliness of being constantly surrounded by people and yet utterly alone, because the false self cannot be known. It can only be used. And here, in this loneliness, in this betrayal of self, the person begins to crack. Some people crack through illness. The body rebels, forces them to stop, makes them finally pay attention. Some people crack through depression. The mask slips. The smile fails. They find themselves unable to get out of bed, unable to continue the performance, unable to pretend anymore that they are fine. Some people crack through rage. After years, decades of swallowed anger, something finally triggers it, a small thing, an innocuous request, and the volcano erupts. They scream, they sob, they say terrible things, and afterward they are horrified at themselves. That's not who I am, they say, but it is who they are. It is the shadow, claiming its voice. And some people crack through awakening. They read a book, have a conversation, sit in a therapist's office, and suddenly see with shocking clarity what they have done to themselves. They see the pattern, they see the wound, they see how they have been complicit in their own disappearing. This moment, this terrible, beautiful moment of seeing, is what we call the dark night of the soul. It is the moment when all the defenses fail, when the lies we have told ourselves can no longer hold, when we must face the truth of what we have become. It is the moment Maria had 3 months ago, when her daughter, her teenage daughter, said to her, "Mom, why do you let everyone treat you like that? Why don't you ever stand up for yourself? It's like you don't even exist." Out of the mouths of babes. That night Maria lay awake, and something inside her shattered. Not her false self, that had shattered long ago without her knowing. What shattered was the illusion that her false self was working, was protecting her, was making her loved. What shattered was the story she had been telling herself about who she was and why she lived the way she lived. And in that shattering, in that terrible darkness, a question emerged. Who am I without my goodness? If I am not needed, if I am not useful, if I am not sacrificing myself for others, what is left of me? This is the existential crisis at the heart of the kindness wound. This is the terror that keeps people locked in the pattern, even when it is destroying them. Because the false self, as painful as it is, provides identity, purpose, meaning. It tells us who we are. It gives us a role to play. And the thought of living without it, of existing as just ourselves, flawed, ordinary, needing, feels like death. But it is not death. It is birth. Act 3. The Awakening. Integrated Goodness. There is a story told by the Sufi mystics about a woman who spent her life giving away everything she owned to the poor. She gave her food, her clothes, her money, her time. She gave until she had nothing left, until she was herself starving and naked and homeless. And when she died and came before the divine, she expected to be rewarded for her selflessness. But the divine looked at her with sadness and said, "I gave you a life. I gave you a body, a mind, a heart. I gave you the gift of existence, the miracle of consciousness, and you treated it as garbage. You threw it away. You rejected my gift. That is not holiness. That is insult." This story haunts me because it cuts to the heart of what true goodness actually is. True goodness is not self-destruction. True compassion includes the self. True virtue does not require invisibility. The healing of the kindness wound begins with a radical realization. You cannot give what you do not have. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot love others authentically if you do not love yourself. Not the narcissistic self-obsession of our culture, but the basic fundamental acknowledgement that you are as worthy of care as anyone else you would care for. This sounds simple. It is perhaps the most difficult thing a person with a kindness wound will ever do, because it requires mourning. It requires grieving the life you have lived, the self you have sacrificed, the years you have lost to the false self. It requires anger, not at others, but at the system, the culture, the family, the beliefs that taught you that your existence was conditional. Maria's healing began in a therapist's office with a simple but devastating question. "Maria, what do you want?" She couldn't answer. She literally could not access the answer. She had spent so long attuned to what everyone else wanted that she had no idea what she herself wanted. The question felt foreign, almost offensive. Selfish? But the therapist persisted, week after week, month after month. What do you want? Not what should you want, not what would be best for everyone. What do you want? Slowly, painfully, Maria began to excavate her buried self. She discovered that she wanted quiet. She wanted time alone. She wanted to paint again, something she hadn't done since college. She wanted to say no without explaining or apologizing. She wanted to be angry at her husband without immediately smoothing it over. She wanted to exist not as a function, but as a person. And then came the hardest part, actually doing it, actually saying no, actually setting boundaries, actually disappointing people. The first time she said no to covering a shift at work, she had a panic attack. Her body interpreted it as a life-threatening danger, because to her nervous system, shaped by decades of conditioning, it was. Saying no meant rejection. Rejection meant abandonment. Abandonment meant death. But she didn't die. She said no, and the world kept turning. Her colleague was mildly annoyed, but found someone else. The relationship survived, and Maria experienced something she had never felt before, the power of her own agency. This is where the real work begins, the slow, unglamorous work of rewiring the nervous system, of teaching the body that it is safe to have needs, safe to have limits, safe to exist as a separate being with inherent worth. The neuroscientist Stephen Porges developed something called polyvagal theory, which explains how our nervous system operates in three basic states: social engagement, safety, connection, fight or flight, mobilization, defense, and shutdown, immobilization, collapse. People with kindness wounds often live in a chronic state of fawn response, a fourth option that Porges later acknowledged, where we appease and accommodate to avoid threat. Healing means moving out of the fawn response and into genuine social engagement, where we can connect with others while maintaining boundaries, where we can give from choice rather than compulsion, where we can receive as well as offer. But this is not just a psychological process. It is spiritual. It is philosophical. It requires a complete reconceptualization of what goodness actually means. The Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron speaks of something she calls idiot compassion, the kind of compassion that enables dysfunction, that protects people from the consequences of their actions, that sacrifices truth for the sake of false peace. True compassion, she teaches, sometimes looks harsh. Sometimes it means saying no. Sometimes it means letting someone be uncomfortable, be disappointed, face their own karma. True compassion is not nice. It is honest. It is boundaried. It includes the self as worthy of the same care and consideration we extend to others. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the process of becoming whole, of integrating the shadow, of including all parts of ourselves in consciousness, rather than exiling them into darkness. For people with kindness wounds, individuation means reclaiming the shadow, the needs, the anger, the selfishness, the no, and bringing these into conscious relationship with the false self's gifts of empathy and care. The goal is not to become selfish. The goal is to become integrated. Integrated goodness includes boundaries. It knows when to give and when to withhold. It can differentiate between helping and enabling, between compassion and codependency, between service and servitude. Integrated goodness includes anger, not the toxic, destructive anger of the wounded ego, but the clean anger of healthy boundaries being violated, the anger that says this is not acceptable, that protects the self from exploitation. Integrated goodness includes selfishness, the healthy selfishness of self-preservation, of acknowledging one's own needs as legitimate, of taking up space in the world without apologizing for existence. And integrated goodness includes choice. This is crucial. When you give from compulsion, from fear, from the desperate need to be worthy, that is not virtue, it is slavery. But when you give from genuine choice, from authentic abundance, from wholeness rather than wound, that is sacred. That is real love. Maria is still learning this. It has been a year since her awakening, and the work is ongoing. She has cut back her hours at work. She has started painting again. She has begun, awkwardly, to express her needs to her husband. Some of her friendships have fallen away. It turned out they were based entirely on what she could provide, and when she stopped providing, the friends disappeared. That hurt, but it was also clarifying. She is learning to tolerate being disliked. This might be the greatest challenge. For decades, her entire identity was built on being universally liked, being the good one, being indispensable. But as she sets boundaries, some people don't like her anymore. They call her selfish, changed, not the person they knew. And they're right. She's not. She's becoming the person she was always meant to be before the kindness wound taught her to disappear. And here's what she's discovering. The people who matter, the relationships worth having, are actually getting deeper. Her husband, after initial confusion and resistance, has started to show up differently. When she stopped managing his emotions, he had to learn to manage them himself. When she stopped being his mother, he had to become a partner. It's rocky. They're in couples therapy. But there's a realness now that was never there before. Her children, especially her daughter, have expressed something surprising. Respect. Her daughter recently told her, "I'm proud of you, Mom. You're teaching me that I don't have to disappear for people to love me." Maria wept when she heard that, because that is the greatest gift she can give. Not her service, not her sacrifice, but her example of wholeness. This is the awakening. The realization that the very thing you thought made you worthy, your endless giving, your selfless sacrifice, was actually preventing real love. Because real love requires two whole people meeting each other in authentic presence, and you cannot be present if you don't exist. The philosopher Emmanuel Levinas wrote about the ethics of the face, the idea that when we truly see another person's face, we are called into ethical relationship, into responsibility. But there is something he didn't quite say. We also have a face. We also deserve to be seen. The ethics of the face must include our own face, or it is not ethics at all, it is erasure. You have a face, you have needs, you have limits, you have anger, you have desires. You have the right to exist, not as a means to someone else's end, but as an end in yourself. This is not selfishness. This is basic human dignity. And from this place, from wholeness, from integration, from the inclusion of self in the circle of care, genuine goodness becomes possible. Not the desperate, compulsive goodness of the wound, but the free, joyful goodness of choice. This is what it means to love your neighbor as yourself, not instead of yourself, not at the expense of yourself, but as yourself, equal, included, worthy. The technology of transformation is not complex, but it is demanding. It requires awareness, seeing the pattern, recognizing the wound, acknowledging how you have participated in your own disappearing, mourning, grieving what was lost, the years sacrificed, the self-abandoned, the life unlived. Anger, allowing the clean anger of healthy boundaries, the rage at injustice, the fury at a system that taught you to betray yourself. Practice, daily hourly practice of saying no, stating needs, taking up space, disappointing people, tolerating discomfort. Community, finding others who understand, who are doing the work, who can witness your unfolding without trying to fix or shame you back into the old pattern. And finally, compassion for yourself, for the child who did what they had to do to survive, for the journey ahead, for the stumbles and relapses and moments of backsliding that are inevitable. This is not a linear process. There is no graduation, no moment when you are healed and can stop paying attention. The kindness wound is a lifelong pattern, etched deep into neural pathways, encoded in muscle memory, woven into identity. But with awareness, with practice, with community, the pattern can change. The wound can heal. not by becoming its opposite, not by becoming selfish, cruel, or indifferent, but by becoming integrated, whole, authentic, real. This is the promise and the challenge of the awakening, to become a person who can truly love because they have learned to include themselves in the category of beings worthy of love, to become genuinely good because goodness is a choice rather than a compulsion, to become free. Conclusion in the echo of wholeness. We have traveled far tonight, you and I. From the origins of the kindness wound in childhood survival strategies, through its devastating consequences in adult life, to the possibility of awakening and integration. We have seen how goodness, that most celebrated of virtues, can become a sophisticated form of self-harm when it is rooted in fear rather than freedom. But let me leave you with this. Your wound is not your fault, but your healing is your responsibility. No one is coming to save you. No amount of giving will finally make you worthy. You already are. No degree of sacrifice will earn you the love you seek. That love must come from within, or it will never feel real. The shadow of kindness is not overcome by becoming unkind. It is overcome by becoming conscious, by bringing into the light what has been hidden in darkness, by including in your circle of care the one person you have systematically excluded, yourself. This work, this sacred, difficult, unglamorous work of integration is not selfish. It is the most generous thing you can do. Because when you heal yourself, you stop spreading the wound. When you learn to give from wholeness rather than wound, you model for others what authentic goodness looks like. When you include yourself in your own compassion, you give permission for others to do the same. We live in a world that desperately needs more kindness, more compassion, more people willing to care for each other. But we do not need more martyrs. We do not need more people sacrificing themselves on the altar of being good. We need whole people, integrated people, people who can give without disappearing, who can care without collapsing, who can love without losing themselves. Maria's story is not finished, neither is yours. The work of integration is the work of a lifetime. But it is work worth doing. Because on the other side of the kindness wound is not selfishness, it is freedom. The freedom to choose, the freedom to be, the freedom to exist not as a function but as a miracle. You are not here to be useful. You are not here to be convenient. You are not here to make others comfortable at the cost of your own existence. You are here because existence itself is valuable. Your life is not a problem to be solved or a gift to be sacrificed. It is an experience to be lived, a consciousness to be explored, a story to be told. So I ask you one final time, what do you want? Not what should you want, not what would make you good. What do you want? Sit with that question. Let it disturb you. Let it crack open the false self and reveal what has been buried beneath decades of conditioning. And then, with whatever courage you can muster, begin. Begin the work of reclaiming yourself. Begin saying no. Begin stating your needs. Begin disappointing people. Begin taking up space. Begin the slow, sacred work of loving yourself as fiercely as you have loved everyone else. This is not the end of goodness. This is its beginning. The shadow of kindness dissolves not by rejecting kindness, but by integrating it with wholeness. The wound heals not by becoming its opposite, but by becoming conscious. And you who have listened to this journey, who have perhaps seen yourself in these words, you are already beginning. The fact that you are here paying attention, asking questions, means the awakening has started. The false self is cracking. The real self is emerging. Welcome home. May you find the courage to include yourself in your own kindness. May you discover that your needs are not shameful but sacred. May you learn that boundaries are not walls but bridges. Bridges to genuine relationship, to authentic love, to real connection. And may you come to know in your bones what the mystics have always known. that you are already worthy, not because of what you do or give or sacrifice, but simply because you are. You are a node of consciousness in an infinite universe, a miracle wrapped in skin, a brief and beautiful manifestation of the cosmos looking at itself with wonder. That is enough. You are enough, not when you heal, not when you're perfect, not when you finally become good enough. Now, always, already. This is the echo of the ancients, the wisdom hidden in plain sight. The path to transcendence does not require self-destruction. The path to love does not require self-abandonment. The path to goodness does not require disappearing. True spiritual awakening includes the self. True enlightenment embraces the shadow. True transformation is integration, not amputation. So go forth, friend. Go forth and be whole. Be boundaried. Be authentic, be imperfect, be real. And in your wholeness, in your realness, in your brave and messy humanity, may you discover what you have been seeking all along. Not worthiness earned through sacrifice, but inherent worth simply by existing. Not love given conditionally for good behavior, but love that sees you, really sees you, and chooses you anyway. Not the false peace of a silent scream, but the real peace of a voice finally speaking truth. This is the promise on the other side of the shadow: freedom, authenticity, life, and it has been waiting for you all along. Thank you for walking this path with me tonight. May you carry these words not as a burden, but as a key to unlock the prison you didn't know you were in. A key to open the door to a life where goodness and selfhood are not enemies but allies, where compassion includes the self, where love finally comes home. The journey continues. The awakening deepens. The echo resounds. Go well, travelers. Go whole.